consciousness has long stood as one of philosophy's deepest enigmas, an ever-fascinating, sometimes confounding feature of our existence. At first glance, the word itself seems familiar, appearing in daily conversation and self-reflection alike. Yet, as philosophers have observed for centuries, the very act of trying to define consciousness draws us into a labyrinth of questions. What exactly is this phenomenon that allows us to experience the world, to feel pain and pleasure, to be aware of ourselves as thinking beings? To even begin to answer, we must clarify what we mean by consciousness. The term's ambiguity is nothing new. Its etymology traces back to the Latin conscientia, meaning knowledge with or joint knowledge. In English, the word has been in use since at least the 17th century, sometimes overlapping with conscience, a notion more closely tied to morality. Over time, however, consciousness shed much of its moral weight and took on a psychological meaning, coming to refer to the subjective quality of experience itself. As the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy and other sources note, this historical shift set the stage for modern debates about the mind and its mysteries. Philosophers have generally agreed that consciousness is, at its core, about what it is like to be something, to borrow a phrase made famous by Thomas Nagel. When we speak of consciousness, we often mean the felt quality of experience, the what it is like to see the color red, taste sweetness, or feel a pang of longing. This is sometimes called phenomenal consciousness, and it stands in contrast to the many processes of the body and brain that continue without entering our awareness. Here, philosophers distinguish between creature consciousness, the state of being a conscious entity, like a human or perhaps an animal, and state consciousness, which refers to specific episodes or conditions of being conscious, such as being awake, dreaming, or in deep concentration. Awareness, meanwhile, enters the discussion with its own set of nuances. Some researchers suggest that awareness is best understood as a physical notion, while consciousness is a subjective one. The two are often conflated in both philosophical and scientific literature, but making a careful distinction is crucial. Awareness typically refers to the basic capacity to register stimuli or information, sometimes without the vividness or self-reflection that consciousness entails. In this view, one might be aware of a sound or a sensation without necessarily being conscious of being aware, an important subtlety that has fueled much debate. The relationship between consciousness and self-awareness adds yet another layer of complexity. In philosophical tradition, self-awareness is typically seen as the capacity to reflect upon oneself, to recognize oneself as the subject of experience. It is, as sources note, an awareness of oneself rather than just an awareness of the external world. This distinction is not merely academic. Empirical research supports the idea that self-awareness and self-consciousness, though often used interchangeably in everyday language, are in fact distinct. Self-awareness involves an objective observation of one's own thoughts and feelings, while self-consciousness can refer to an excessive preoccupation with how one is perceived by others. This subtle difference has implications for emotional well-being and psychological health, as highlighted by contemporary studies. Historians of philosophy have traced early reflections on consciousness and awareness back to Neolithic and pre-literate societies, suggesting that humans have long grappled with the question of what it means to experience and to know oneself. Over the centuries, these questions have evolved, leading to modern distinctions that still animate philosophical inquiry. Contemporary thinkers continue to wrestle with foundational puzzles. How do conscious states relate to the physical body? Is consciousness purely a product of the brain? Or, as some neurobiological theories propose, does it have a non-dual or non-local character? In the end, consciousness and awareness remain entwined yet distinct threads in the fabric of human experience, each inviting us to look more deeply into what it means to be present, to know, and, perhaps most enigmatically, to know that we know. The puzzle persists, not because we lack definitions, but because the phenomenon itself seems to resist final explanation. This enduring mystery keeps consciousness at the very heart of philosophy, making the effort to define its terrain as much an invitation to wonder as it is a quest for clarity. Imagine waking up and, for a brief moment, feeling the world pour in, the light at the window, the warmth of the sheets, the subtle hum of a distant radio. This flood of subjective experience, so immediate yet so mysterious, has fueled centuries of philosophical inquiry. How can the inner glow of consciousness emerge from the tangled circuitry of the brain? Or does it, perhaps, belong to an entirely different order of reality? As we explore the major theories and models of consciousness, we find ourselves in a landscape crowded with competing explanations, each attempting to unravel what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness, why and how subjective experience arises at all. One of the oldest and most influential perspectives is dualism. famously championed by René Descartes. Dualists argue that the mind and body are fundamentally distinct. The physical body, with its neurons and chemical reactions, operates in the world of extension and matter, while the mind exists in a separate, non-physical realm. This view has a certain intuitive appeal. After all, our thoughts and feelings seem radically different from flesh and bone. But it also faces the formidable challenge of explaining how two such different substances could interact. Despite centuries of criticism and evolving scientific knowledge, dualism continues to have its defenders, particularly because it offers a straightforward way to account for the apparent gap between physical processes and conscious experience. In contrast, materialism or physicalism claims that everything about consciousness can, in principle, be explained in terms of physical processes. According to materialists, the mind is what the brain does. All mental states, including the feeling of seeing red or the pain of a stubbed toe, are ultimately reducible to neural activity. This approach has gained traction as neuroscience uncovers ever more detailed correlations between brain states and conscious states, fueling hopes that a full scientific account may one day be within reach. Yet, as philosophers like David Chalmers have argued, the existence of such correlations does not by itself explain why these processes are accompanied by subjective experience. This is the crux of the hard problem of consciousness, a term Chalmers introduced to highlight the explanatory gap between objective mechanisms and the felt qualities, the qualia of experience. Some philosophers have sought to bridge this gap by turning to panpsychism, an idea with ancient roots that is experiencing a modern revival. Panpsychists propose that consciousness, or at least some primitive form of experience, is a fundamental feature of all matter. On this view, even the smallest particles possess proto-mental properties, and human consciousness arises from complex combinations and organizations of these micro-experiences. While panpsychism may seem counterintuitive, it sidesteps the leap from matter to mind by positing that consciousness has always been present, though in forms vastly simpler than our own. Critics, however, question whether this theory genuinely explains consciousness or merely relocates the mystery to a different level. The past century has seen a proliferation of models seeking to clarify not only what consciousness is, but how it operates. Functionalism, for example, suggests that conscious states are defined by their causal roles, how they process information and guide behavior, rather than by their underlying physical or mental substance. This approach underpins many contemporary cognitive models, including the influential global workspace theory. According to this model, consciousness functions as a global workspace in the brain, integrating information from various specialized modules so it can be flexibly broadcast throughout the system. Other scientific models, such as integrated information theory, attempt to quantify consciousness by measuring how much information is unified within a system. Each of these models aims to move beyond mere correlation, seeking explanatory frameworks that might bridge the chasm between neural activity and subjective life. Yet, for all their ingenuity, none of these theories has achieved consensus. Some philosophers advocate for illusionism, the provocative idea that consciousness, as we intuitively conceive it, is ultimately an illusion generated by the brain's self-modeling capacities. This stance sidesteps the hard problem by suggesting that our sense of subjective richness is a kind of trick, a useful fiction. Others hold out hope that future advances, perhaps in quantum theory or a deeper understanding of information processing, will finally dissolve the mystery. What remains clear is the persistence of the puzzle. The hard problem continues to loom over both philosophy and science, resisting easy solutions and fueling debate across disciplines. Whether consciousness is an emergent property of complex systems, a fundamental aspect of the universe, or something else entirely, the search for answers continues to map the terrain of the mind, revealing not only the limits of our understanding, but also the profound depth of the mystery itself. Picture yourself gazing into a mirror. In that moment of recognition, a world of philosophical questions arises. Who is the person looking back? Is that face truly you, or merely an image shaped by fleeting experience and the mind's mysterious workings? Awareness, at its most basic, is the register of experience, the gentle noticing of light on skin or the pulse of a heartbeat. Yet within this awareness, something more intricate takes root, the sense of self, the feeling that there is an I at the heart of consciousness, observing, deciding, and enduring across time. Philosophers have long tried to unravel how awareness gives rise to personal identity and agency. John Locke, writing in the 17th century, famously argued that personal identity is not tied to the substance of the body or soul, but instead to continuity of consciousness, most notably, memory. According to Locke, you are the same person across days and years because you remember being yourself in the past. For him, consciousness is a stream of acts of awareness threading together the disparate moments of a human life. If you can recall, for example, climbing a tree as a child, then, regardless of how your body or even your personality may have changed, you are, in a deep sense, the same self that once balanced on those branches. This psychological continuity theory stands in contrast to the Cartesian view, which roots identity in an immaterial thinking substance, and to Hume's skepticism, which questions whether any stable self exists at all. But what does it mean to be aware of oneself rather than just the world? Developmental psychology suggests that self-awareness is not innate, but emerges through early relationships and the process of mentalizing, grasping that oneself and others have minds with feelings and intentions. Studies show that young children begin to recognize themselves in mirrors and photos, marking a leap in self-concept. This mirror self-recognition is more than a parlor trick. It signals the dawning of self-consciousness, the realization that the being in the reflection is not just an object, but a subject, an I capable of agency. Agency, the sense that one is the author of thoughts and actions, also depends on awareness. Philosophical and scientific research indicates that self-related information plays a pivotal role in the feeling of agency. When you move your hand and see it obey, your sense of being the cause is strengthened by your awareness of intention and outcome. Conversely, when outcomes feel disconnected from intention, agency wavers. This interplay is not just a philosophical curiosity, it has practical significance, shaping everything from moral responsibility to psychological well-being. The structure of self-experience is layered. Some theorists, such as Dan Zahavi, have argued for a minimal self, a basic, pre-reflective self-awareness that accompanies all conscious experience. Even before we ponder ourselves as objects of reflection, there is a point of view, a sense of for-me-ness that marks our experience as our own. From this kernel, more elaborate forms of self-observation arise. To observe oneself, to turn awareness back upon the self, is to engage in a reflexive act. Philosophers note that this ability to observe our own mental states is distinct from basic consciousness. It is as if the I stands apart, surveying the organism's reactions, thoughts, and emotions. This self-observation underpins introspection, allowing us to evaluate motives and imagine ourselves from the outside. Thought experiments have been invaluable in probing these mysteries. They serve as conceptual laboratories, places where we can test the boundaries of identity and agency without risk or consequence. Imagine waking up in another body, or with someone else's memories. Are you still you? Such scenarios press us to clarify which aspects of awareness are essential to selfhood. Philosophers have used these mental exercises not only to challenge logic, but to explore the very fabric of identity, agency, and the observer within. They invite us to ask, if our memories, bodies, or personalities changed, would the I endure? The development of self-identity, as contemporary psychology and philosophy both suggest, is an ongoing process shaped by the integration of awareness. Our sense of self is both discovered and constructed, influenced by relationships, social feedback, and personal reflection. The tension between personal agency, the ability to choose and act, and social determinism, the pressures that shape who we become, remains central in discussions of identity. Yet the thread that binds these elements is awareness, the capacity to notice, to reflect, and to observe oneself as a subject embedded in experience. In all its forms, awareness is not merely a passive register of events, but the ground from which identity and agency spring. Whether through the child's dawning recognition in a mirror, the adult's reflection on past choices, or the philosopher's thought experiment, the self emerges as both the observer and the observed. It is a puzzle with no final answer, yet one whose contemplation enriches our understanding of what it means to be a conscious, acting being in the world. Imagine the mind as a vast landscape, its boundaries shifting and porous, sometimes illuminated by the ordinary light of wakeful awareness, and at other times transformed by altered states that defy everyday logic. Scientists and philosophers alike have become increasingly fascinated by these altered states of consciousness, which range from the immersive world of dreaming to the profound stillness achieved in deep meditation. These experiences challenge any simple, static definition of consciousness, inviting us to consider not only its boundaries, but also the very conditions that make awareness possible. Lucid dreaming, for example, offers a curious twist on ordinary experience. In such dreams, individuals become aware that they are dreaming and, in some cases, can influence the unfolding narrative. Once considered rare or even impossible, this phenomenon has now been empirically documented and is recognized as a genuine altered state. Lucid dreams often arise spontaneously but can also be cultivated through meditative practices, as researchers have discovered in studies linking meditation, peak experiences, and the ability to recognize and shape dream content. The state of lucid sleep, in which individuals maintain a thread of awareness even as the body rests in deep sleep, further expands our sense of what consciousness might encompass. Some research has even explored dreamless lucid states, reported by experienced meditators, where awareness persists without any content or imagery at all. These altered states are not confined to the world of sleep. Meditation itself, practiced in diverse forms across cultures, can induce states of consciousness marked by a vivid sense of presence, self-transcendence, or even a feeling of unity with the world. Empirical studies using meditation and visual stimulation have documented out-of-body experiences, moments when individuals report observing themselves from outside their physical form. Other forms of altered consciousness, such as those induced by psychedelics or by certain neurological conditions, have also attracted scientific scrutiny. While the subjective reports of these experiences vary, they share a common thread. Each seems to reveal hidden dimensions of the mind, raising questions about what counts as normal, awareness, and whether the boundaries of consciousness are far more flexible than tradition suggests. The significance of altered states extends beyond the merely curious or mystical. Some researchers propose that exploring these unusual experiences can help clarify what is essential to consciousness itself. For instance, recent brain imaging studies have mapped the intricate networks connecting subcortical and cortical regions that appear crucial for integrating arousal and awareness. Other neuroscientific findings indicate that particular structures in the brain are activated during moments of conscious perception, and new tools such as transcranial focused ultrasound offer promising ways to probe these circuits. Yet the subjective richness of altered states, whether vivid or empty, embodied or disembodied, reminds us that consciousness may not be a single, uniform phenomenon, but rather a spectrum of possibilities. This idea of a spectrum has begun to reshape philosophical debates about consciousness, especially as new kinds of awareness emerge in unexpected domains. The question of artificial intelligence looms large here. Could a sufficiently advanced artificial intelligence system ever be conscious? Some theorists argue that certain cognitive architectures or computational structures might produce something like consciousness, at least in principle. Others remain deeply skeptical, insisting that without a biological substrate, artificial systems can only mimic the outward forms of awareness, never achieving true subjective experience. Recent debates have focused on how, or even if, we could recognize consciousness in an artificial mind. Some propose using neuroscientific theories and computational functionalism to identify potential indicators of artificial intelligence consciousness, while others warn against the dangers of mistaking sophisticated behavior for genuine awareness, a risk known as semantic pareidolia. There is ongoing discussion about whether large language models and other advanced systems can display emergent behaviors, but whether these reflect anything like conscious awareness remains highly disputed. Some philosophers suggest that our inability to agree on what counts as a mind reveals the anthropocentric bias at the heart of consciousness studies, a tendency to treat human experience as the gold standard. A few researchers have gone further, proposing a spectrum model that extends not only across humans and animals, but potentially to artificial systems as well. This challenges the conventional view that consciousness is exclusively biological, opening the door to the possibility that awareness might arise wherever certain organizational principles are met. Yet, authoritative voices caution that, as of now, there is no convincing evidence that any existing artificial intelligence system is conscious in the way humans or even animals are. The debate remains open, unresolved, and contentious, with some declaring that conscious artificial intelligence is a conceptual impossibility, while others urge continued exploration. Through the lens of altered states, whether achieved in the depths of meditation, the theater of dreams, or the circuits of silicon, the boundaries of consciousness become less like walls and more like thresholds. Each new perspective, each unusual experience suggests that awareness is not fixed but emergent, layered, and perhaps even stranger than we have yet imagined. As research continues to probe the frontiers of mind and machine, the question of where consciousness begins and ends remains one of the most profound and tantalizing mysteries in philosophy and science. As the quest to understand consciousness moves forward, one cannot help but feel both awe and humility. The subject resists easy answers, its mystery deepening even as scientific and philosophical tools become more sophisticated. From today's vantage point, consciousness remains one of the most stubbornly unsolved problems in all of philosophy, and the urgency to unravel its secrets has only grown. New technological frontiers, artificial intelligence, advanced neural imaging, and neurotechnology not only provide metaphors for the mind, but actively reshape the questions we ask and the methods we use to investigate awareness. In recent years, interdisciplinary collaboration has surged as researchers recognize that no single field holds the key to this riddle. At places like MIT, philosophers and neuroscientists work side by side, striving to bridge the gap between subjective experience and objective measurement. The challenge is not just to describe what consciousness feels like, but to develop reliable, scientific ways to detect and quantify it, methods that move beyond intuition or introspection. Even as new brain imaging techniques promise unprecedented detail, the fundamental gap remains. The so-called hard problem, why subjective experience arises from physical processes, remains as enigmatic as ever. It is a testament to the depth of the mystery that, despite decades of effort by the world's brightest minds, no consensus has emerged. Debates continue to swirl around the boundaries of consciousness itself. Where exactly does awareness begin or end? Neuroscientists, philosophers, and computer scientists regularly gather at workshops and cross-disciplinary forums searching for clues. Some of the most pressing questions concern the distinction between conscious and unconscious neural processes. How does the brain shift from mere information processing to genuine experience? What is the threshold at which awareness flickers into existence? These are not just technical puzzles. They challenge our deepest assumptions about mind and reality. The idea of transferring consciousness, whether to another brain, to a machine, or even across time, remains speculative, yet it is a topic of ongoing debate. No one yet knows whether such a feat is possible or whether consciousness is so deeply bound to its biological context that any attempt at transference is unlikely to succeed. Some theorists have begun to explore new frameworks, proposing, for example, that consciousness might be a relativistic phenomenon, its qualities, and perhaps even its existence, dependent on the cognitive frame of the observer. These ideas push the boundaries of what has traditionally been considered scientific, highlighting the necessity of philosophical reflection alongside empirical research. With the rapid development of artificial intelligence and neurotechnology, the stakes have grown higher. There is an increasing urgency to define and test for consciousness, not just to satisfy intellectual curiosity, but to address profound ethical challenges. As machines become more sophisticated, scientists warn of the risks of misattributing consciousness or failing to recognize it where it might emerge. The ethical implications are significant, requiring new frameworks that can keep pace with technological change. What stands out is the growing consensus that progress in consciousness studies depends on a truly interdisciplinary approach. Workshops and research initiatives now routinely integrate insights from both the humanities and the sciences, blending philosophical reflection with empirical investigation. Some voices argue that only by combining neuroscience, computer science, and philosophy can we hope to make headway. Others call for even broader collaboration, drawing in literature, art, and ethics to enrich our understanding of consciousness and its place in the human story. Despite these advances, the mystery has only deepened. Some researchers believe the enigma of consciousness may be even more profound than previously thought, with each new theoretical proposal raising as many questions as it answers. The divide between philosophical and scientific perspectives persists, but there is a growing recognition that both are necessary. The search for a scientific test of awareness, for example, must be guided by philosophical clarity about what it is we seek to measure. Looking ahead, the frontiers of consciousness research appear both tantalizing and daunting. The field is alive with possibility, but also with uncertainty. Ongoing debates about the nature and boundaries of awareness, the potential for artificial minds, and the very definition of consciousness will likely continue for decades to come. What seems clear is that the enduring mystery of consciousness, its irreducible strangeness and centrality to the human condition, will continue to inspire wonder, reflection, and inquiry. In the end, perhaps consciousness is not a problem to be solved, but a frontier to be explored, inviting each generation to marvel anew at the depths of experience and the endless horizons of the mind.